Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're coming from across the world, sweeping the nation through the galaxy, whether you're in the internal Earth, whether you're in another dimension, welcome to Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. I'm Brandon James Sim. This is Chris Noble, your content creator. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Brandon. That's my favorite intro so far. Thank you to everybody listening. Today's episode is going to be a wild one. I'm excited.
Yes. So Chris called me up and he was all excited about. We did a great show on giants, and Chris actually has a lot of evidence that I don't know why we didn't talk about this. So, Chris, I would love for you to take us all away on a magical journey talking about giant artifacts and evidence of giants existing on planet Earth.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And for those of you listening, for those of you watching, we had our best response so far to the episode on giants. So, of course, this is all about you guys and your contributions to the channel, whether it's listening or watching on YouTube. Your comments and everything really matter. So, for that reason, that's why we're doing another episode today, because there's so much to talk about with giants, of course. And even today, we'll just scratch the surface of so many more things. But just so you know, we listen, and that's why we're doing this today. So thanks again for all of your comments and everything you've mentioned so far. There's going to be some cool evidence today that I'm going to present, and I want you guys to call us out if you think that this stuff is false or might have other information that we might be missing. That's the beauty of this situation here, is we can all learn from each other, and that's what's been happening. That's what I'm loving right now with this whole way that the content's been rolling out, and everyone that's been engaging has been helping us inform us of things we've missed, or just things altogether that we didn't know about and we can look into. So throughout this episode, yeah, I'm going to present some stuff, and you guys let me know in the comments whether you think it's good, you think it's legit, or you can poke some holes in it. And let's poke holes in things. I think that's great. So what I wanted to start with today was something I actually came across very recently, and this one is the one that I would love for people to poke holes in, because I really don't know if this is legit or not. And from what I've briefly looked up, I've looked up a little bit online. There's a series of different articles. And this first piece of evidence is going to take us down to Ecuador. And I'm just going to share my screen, of course, for those of you listening. I'll be describing everything we're looking at right now. And I'm going to play a video. I'm going to play a video for in a moment that has a woman describing what you'll be seeing. And this is a giant skeleton. And the reason why I would love, I'm the most critical of this piece of evidence right now. We've got some others that we'll present later that are, in my opinion, quite concrete, pretty incredible, and my personal experience with a giant footprint in South Africa. And we're going to finish off the episode with that one. But this one is a 20-foot tall ancient giant skeleton. And the craziest thing is that it's on an exhibit in a museum in Ecuador. And I literally had to scratch my head so many times around this one, because it's huge. It's completely eye-opening. It's 20 feet tall. For those of you in the metric system, like we are here in Canada, sort of not, kind of not in Canada. It's 7 meters, basically. This thing is huge. That is at 7, 8 times the height of a human being. Plus, I don't know, whatever. It's huge. So this is in a museum. This is on display, but it's in Ecuador. And this is the thing that we encounter a lot in archaeology, is there is a very weird, unfortunate prejudice with a lot of countries that are not from Western, not from the Western world, let's say. And they get looked down upon, and they don't get as much respect. And I wonder if that's why we haven't heard anything of this giant that is apparently on display in a museum. And it's been verified by at least some scientists down in Ecuador that this is a real skeleton. Now, a skeleton of a human, but just a massive one. So I'm going to play the video. Let's listen to a little bit of the first 2 minutes of it, where she's going to describe, where this came from and a bit more of the details. And then we'll talk a bit more about it afterwards. So let's take a quick listen and watch.
Plus foot tall ancient giant skeletons are now on exhibit for the world to see. They are the giants of Ecuador, the Ecuadorian giants, over 7 meters tall. In Loja province of southern Ecuador and the Peru border, there have been many strange relics that have been uncovered. Bones and full skeletons, very similar to those of humans, but of incredible size. These skeletons, these ancient artifacts, have been watched over for many years by several guardians in the beautiful valleys of that province. By far, the most famous and well-known of these guardians was Father Carlos Miguel Vaca, who guarded until his death in 1999 several bones and fragments unearthed from the site called Chanjayminas, which translates means God's Cemetery. Several fragments were redirected to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington of the United States for people to study their density, age, and weight, and etc. This was broadcast on television program for Ecuador, which lasted over 2 hours as a documentary led by renowned director Alfonso Espinosa de los Monteros. So for the present, some of these pieces that have been collected and shown to the world by renowned UFO researcher Klaus Donna. Other important relics and fragments are known to be in private collections held by people who are not interested in sharing them, at least not for the public. These ancient skeletons, the giant ancient skeletons of Ecuador, have been studied by different scientists and anatomists from 7 fragments, and these scientists confirm that these ancient giant skeletons are part of a human skeleton that was, however, 7 times the size of a modern human being.
Okay, so we're going to stop that there. And there's so much to unpack just even in that. So first of all, I'll get a little critical for a bit here, which is important, I think, in this show, and I know we'll get it in the comments, I'm sure. Who are the scientists, that were confirming this? I would love to see. And here's the problem: when we get things that are such huge anomalies, it's hard to find verification from let's call them legitimate scientific sources, because the problem with science a lot of the time is that it is very political, and these scientists, that they'll get likely very ridiculed, even though this might be very well legit. So it's not surprising that we don't get a lot of information on who the scientists were that confirmed these findings and that legitimized these bones as real, but just massive bones. However, I'm of the side that really believes that these are real. We need more verification, but it's so hard when you're in a scientific system that has a lot of prejudice, and they basically don't want to find these things because they completely go against, of course, a lot of other major scientific dogma. And that is an issue in that world. So it's wishy-washy. It's hard to know because there's not a ton of verification scientifically by the sounds of it. However, it's hard to verify it scientifically because most people, get ridiculed in their own practice.
Well, yeah, you'll get punished, right? If you're, unless you're untouchable, which very few people are, and they're often very few, right? Most people are relying on grant research, university or college support. And if you are someone who brings up, hey, by the way, I'm the professor of anthropology at X university, I would love to bring up a study down to Ecuador to look at these 20-foot skeletons, they're going to think that you have a drug problem or something and probably pull your funding. And if they know anything about it, if they've heard whispers about it, then it's going to be in their best interest, usually, to shush you up. And I'm not sure why, but that seems to be the commonplace.
We also heard there that the Smithsonian has some of these, and you may have seen our reactions on the video of this, which was kind of like, oh God, the Smithsonian. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, I would love to still go to the Smithsonian Museum in the States and check a lot of their things out. It's a great resource, but they're famous, especially when it comes to giants. They are famous in, I guess, the alternative community for hiding these things and just basically not bringing them to the public's attention. And essentially, there's a giant discovery. They find these bones, and then the Smithsonian comes around, and then they're gone, and you can't find them anymore. So,
well, the Smithsonian, its beginnings come from the people of the Mississippi Valley, which were mound building people and had amazing structures with amazing math behind their
That
structures as
Serpent
well. These
Mound, I
mounds.
think one of them. Yeah.
Serpent Mound, yeah, that's a little higher north, but
Okay.
it all goes down the Mississippi Valley there,
Yeah.
and that was where the Smithsonian came in. It was trying to find about the antiquity, the high cultured civilizations of America, which a lot of people will argue that there's more evidence to it than what we know because they're trying to downplay it. Because if you're going back to Europe and you're like, hey, we're taking over this place, and Europeans going, well, aren't there people there? It's better to tell them that they're wearing loincloths rather than doing high cultured things.
Yeah.
uh Yay,
Yeah.
imperialism. But yeah, so you can't do mound culture without discovering giants. So the Smithsonian's beginnings are actually embedded in these skeletons, one way or another. So
Yeah.
very interesting to think about. And all roads seem to end at the Smithsonian when it comes to large bones.
Yeah. And another interesting thing to note is you heard her say private collections. And that's something that I think gets, of course, overlooked because, well, we can't see these private collections. There are so many of these private collections around the world from so many different individuals, some of obvious wealth and elite status, but some from just more normal folk that found some pretty crazy things and they don't want anyone to see them because they know that they'll maybe go and disappear into the Smithsonian. They want to keep them for themselves. There may be benevolent reasons, there may be nefarious reasons, who knows? But there are so many private collections. And sometimes when you're in a museum, you'll see an exhibit that's new or maybe just there for a little bit, and you'll see that it's, oh, this is from a private collector and they're just giving us their collection. This happens a lot, and I'm sure there are certain individuals on this planet that have got things in their private collection that would blow our minds. We don't know, can't know.
Well, there's stories in Egypt of a giant's finger. It's been mummified, and
Saw
apparently the
that.
thing
Yeah.
is like over 12 inches large, a finger. Private collection, and he charges people to see it because obviously, if you're not coming from a massive wealth and you
Mm.
have this might be a source of income for you. But just very, very, very interesting stuff. So looking at that skeleton, my first questions are, they say it's human. Obviously, it's humanoid. I would want to know what similarities there are and what dissimilarities. What that rib cage, is that a normal rib cage? Are there different amounts of ribs? Is it held differently? Is the jaw the same? Is the cranium the same? The shins? Very interesting stuff. So, yeah, is there any more information you have on this giant skeleton?
Not too much, not too much. So I'm going to put the links in the description, of course, for everyone to check out for themselves. Really look into this one for us folks because we want to figure this one out too. This to me, and I wanted to start the episode because we really don't know how legitimate this one is. But if it is, this is the definition of a smoking gun. Wow. Like I'll quickly screen share the Egyptian finger that Brandon was mentioning, and that's amazing, and it's interesting, and it's certainly compelling, and it is incredible how, and it's like mummified finger. It's crazy, but it's not an entire skeleton. This is a whole skeleton that we just had discovered right over. Oop, not in this video. I guess is in another tab of mine. Yeah, this guy here, which is just, you can see a gentleman on a ladder working on just like the hip and lower spine area, and he's basically from the bottom of, like, I don't know, from the bottom of the spine to just like the knee at best. That's his entire body. So I mean, this thing is huge. If it is indeed real, this has got to be like, this is huge. And this came out in 2017, just so everyone knows too. So this is a newer exhibit, and then it's also in Ecuador. And like we said, not a lot of news comes out of a lot of these non-Western countries, even though I mean, this is just mind-blowing. So let us know what you guys think. We're going to move on to some other stuff.
Well, before we do, Chris,
Yeah,
I just
sure.
want to make a note that a lot of the explorers, European explorers who are going down the coast, which seems to be the gold standard for people who we listen to, because God forbid we listen to people who have their own tales of these amazing feats and civilizations. But like Magellan and a lot of other people, when they came down the coast, they talked about seeing giants. Certainly in Patagonia and off of a lot of the islands along the coast of the Americas, they had tales of giants. So, Chris,
Yes.
I would like to know. something like when our last episode that we were talking about giants, we were kind of more in the 7 to 12 feet range there. Now we're into the 20-foot range, and I know that in history we have tales of people that are much larger than that. And I was wondering, what evidence do we have of things that might be larger than this 7 to 12 feet tall? Do we have any evidence of something that, I mean, looking at the size of this skeleton alone, the feet would be huge. That looks like a 3-foot right there. So what do you have in store for us today? What can you show me to entice me to think that perhaps there were giants on this earth in antiquity?
Well, I'm going to start with an artifact, and there's a couple of these artifacts, and these are interesting, and we're going to start there, and then I'm going to show you exactly what you're looking for, which is a footprint that I got to see in South Africa, and the footprint is so large that my body I could stand slightly hunched over inside of a footprint.
I mean, listen to what you're saying, and this is hard for me
Right?
to believe. You better have some photos or something to show me, but
Well,
keep going, keep
I
going.
good thing is I do, and there's also some good videos on YouTube, and this foot that we'll show you in a second is incredibly compelling. But before we do, there's some really interesting artifacts, and they're basically what I wanted to focus on today. And there's other ones too, like swords and weapons that are obscenely large to an extent where you have to start asking the questions: was this, what they'll always say, it's ceremonial, or it's it's just for show. And it's like, okay, like I can believe that to some extent, but this book that we're looking at right now is not the only one like it. There's actually quite a lot of these ancient books. I think this one's not even that old. I believe this was only 300-year-old book, so it's not that old. But if you can see the woman that's right now working on this in some laboratory, oh god, how big is this thing? It's like, I'm trying to describe it for those listening right now. She's opening up the front cover of this book, and her hand is a small fraction of the size of just the corner of the cover of the book, if that makes sense. So this
Would
book
take
is
two people to move that book. To pick it up,
exactly.
you would need two people. That's like picking up plywood stacked with plywood.
It's just, it blows the mind. And like, why would you do this? These are in Mexico City, by the way, the ones that we're looking at here. And
Interesting.
it's really interesting. And the thing is that this book is, I want to say at least 3 feet tall. So it's huge. And it's quite thick. It's got a lot of writing in it. And my question is like, if this was just, let's say, ceremonial, right? If this was some sort of, or not ceremonial, I don't know, it's just humans wanted to make a big book for fun. Okay. But why on earth would they make it so large and extensive with so many pages of information and make it so impossible for humans to really read? Like, you wouldn't read this book if you're a human. It's 3 feet. It's like half the size of your body anyway. Why would you
Okay,
read that book?
what language is this written in?
It looks like Latin, and I'm trying to see what. It's not that old, so remember, this isn't. This could be Old English, but I'm really not exactly sure here, and I might be able to find it as we're looking through here, folks. But
Amen.
that looks
Okay.
like
Yeah,
Latin,
because if it
doesn't
was
it?
so ancient that it was in some different language, that would certainly be, if you're going to create an artifact, why would you create it in a tongue that's not commonly used? And even if you were a Spaniard coming to the Americas, and even if you were to create it, why would you choose Latin? I mean,
Yeah.
Latin was the language of the elites back then, but very interesting, very interesting.
It's really bizarre. So there's more books like this out there, and I encourage everyone to look into these artifacts. There's also swords. There's apparently a bed, a king's bed found in, I believe, it was from ancient Sumeria, but which is now like modern day Iraq, Afghanistan kind of area. And they found this really long, like something like a 15-foot long bed. Once again, the common explanation is always it was the king's ego, or it was so big that he
That's why
wanted
he
a
wanted
fifth.
a 30-foot bed
Yeah, exactly. It's
with
stuff
a
like
helmet
that.
that could fit over top of a toddler.
And that was where they found, again, more artifacts, more weapons that were so large. There's been swords, things like that found, which we can get into in different episodes here. but I want to get to the footprint soon. But for this, I just wanted to show people that there's these physical artifacts that are curious, let's say at the very, very least, as to why on earth they're so large. Why? What is the purpose? If it's for humans that are like us, anatomically like normal humans, like, you know, average 6 feet in height, why on earth would we make a book that big, 3 feet tall, with large writing and a lot of pages to sift through? If it's completely impractical, unless you're a larger species. And there's also a lot of these ancient temples and stuff like as well that have huge doorways, which again, they might very well have been built to be very grandiose and awe-inspiring. But a lot of these places too, you got to wonder if they're built for more larger people, just in general, especially in the more ancient world. It seems that things are just bigger in general. They're building with massive
Well,
megalithic blocks, you know.
and people were, as far as what I was taught, we were smaller back then. So if
Right.
things were bigger back then and we were smaller back then, so if I'm 5'8.5", if I was of an old culture and we were to make, say, a large temple or a large sword or a large axe or a large helmet or a large shield, these are all things we've heard of being unearthed that are, 6-foot axe weighs 350 pounds or
Yeah.
whatever. Who's going to yield that? A massive sword that, is just so big that if you were to be able to pick it up, you can't swing it. So why would I have that artifact? Okay. Maybe it's decorative. That's the only thing you can have. But once again, I noticed that a lot of our uh, archaeologists and historians find anomalies, and it's almost like a puzzle piece. They jam it into the wrong hole and say, "See, look, we made it work." They just adorned it with it was decorational. No, nothing else to see here. I have no evidence to support that. It has to be, because otherwise the other answer is unacceptable. You see that a lot. So, Chris, are you going to take us in Africa now? I'm dying.
Yeah,
Let's see
man.
it,
Let's do
please.
it.
We all want to see.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go to South Africa. And I was really lucky enough in 2017, I guess the same year that massive giant skeleton went on display in Ecuador. And I got to go visit Michael Tellinger down in South Africa, spent 2 weeks with him in his beautiful Stone Circle Museum. And one of the days, he took us out to see this giant footprint. And okay, it's a giant footprint. We need some context here. So here's a photo of Michael putting his foot at the bottom of this footprint. You can see the toes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the top, which maybe there's a 6. We can't quite see it because we do know that the giants, some of them, seems to be a large amount of them, had 6 toes, six fingers. But looks like we got 5 here, which is totally fine. Michael's foot, average size guy. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. His feet, so his feet could fit, not in terms of the area, just in terms of height for this foot. He's got about 6 or 7 of his feet could fit inside this one footprint. All right, folks. So this footprint's roughly about 3 to 4 feet large, tall. Here's another shot of a shoe at the bottom where the heel would be. And once again, it's just so clear, the footprints and the indentation on this rock. Now, this rock, for those listening, is actually parallel to the person standing, meaning that it's not on the ground. You would normally expect a footprint to be on the ground. Obviously, this footprint is on the side of a rock face. So why is that, right? Well, we don't exactly know. One of Michael's theories is that this footprint is so old that it was originally made, let's say, during a point where this was perhaps lava or something, some molten lava, or the rock was for whatever reason softened at that point. Maybe a long time ago, we're talking maybe millions of years ago, and this person stepped in it, and then over time it eroded and moved through earthquakes, through whatever. As we know, lots has happened on this planet, even in the last 12,000 years, let alone longer than that. And now it's in a shape that is vertical. Essentially, it's not horizontal on the ground anymore. It's vertical, and that could be why that feels logical. Maybe it's not. Maybe this giant drop kicked, into a rock face and made a footprint. I don't know. Right? We don't know.
So, Chris, I'm looking at this, and if I were a modern historian or archaeologist, I would say, okay, A, it could be naturally formed, and I want you to argue against that. And B, who's to say that this isn't artwork that maybe someone in the Bronze or Copper Age could not have carved out themselves? Is there any arguments against that Mr. Tellinger or other people that you know perhaps could argue against that? Any distinctive features that might dissuade that argument?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brandon. And you know what? At the end of the day, do we know 100% if this is the real deal? No. This is almost everything we're bringing up, and honestly, anything in general. In reality, we always got to look into, and we got to think critically here. But for me, first of all, there's the initial, when you look right at it, you're like, that is a footprint. End of story. I mean, it's just so obviously a footprint. There's some things that I'll see, and I've seen lots of videos of people showing like, what if this is a rock formation that looks like an ancient giant buried? I'm like, maybe. Or, it could be something else. I look at this and I'm like, this is so clearly a footprint. Now let's zoom in here. One of the reasons for me that this is so clearly a footprint is you can actually see the indents in between the toes. And what I mean by that is when you step in mud, your feet or your toes, have a space between them. I'm not, an expert with anatomy, so I don't know the terms for this stuff, but there's spaces in between your toes. So when the mud seeps through those spaces, of course, the footprint, the toes are down, and then in between each toe, there is the mud or the clay or whatever that makes a more vertical kind of line, and which shows the different feet, right? It divides the toes from each other, and it shows you each toe because of that space in between the toes. It's so clearly defined here in these images. And there's a shadow on the image right now because of the time of day, but even with that shadow, you can very clearly see these ridges that have popped up in between the toes. Okay. And you can go, I've been there physically, I've felt them. They're very legitimate. And when you look at the rock in that area, I know Michael was able to tell us that there's been no activity, and there's all in terms of archaeological stuff going on there for really at all. It's actually an industrial site where they're doing a lot of other kind of like excavation work and stuff. And the geology of this is, could it be natural? Yeah, sure, maybe.
That's
But
like a phenomenon if it's
that, and then
natural.
that's an incredible, yeah. And then you know what? Then we're just showing you guys a really incredible natural phenomenon, which is still interesting because it
That's like
looks like,
divine stuff there. That's like I saw Mother Mary in a potato chip kind of style here.
yeah, and even
Just
that,
divinity.
yeah. I mean, the thing is for me, it's the toes, and it's the shape. You see how everything comes. It's probably easier when you see it wide here, and the shadow actually helps here. You can see how this curves in. Like, what's that part of the foot? I again, I'm not an expert in this, but your feet are larger at the top, and then they curve inward, right? They narrow down, and then they get a little wider again at the heel, right? Or you know what I mean? And so that is the exact shape we're seeing here. Michael put his foot in there without his shoe on, even just to show us like a perfect example of this, like macro and micro, like this really, even on the side, you can sort of see on the left side of this footprint, there's a bit more of an indent. You can see this ridge coming up a little bit here more than on the left. And we know some people's feet, mine certainly have, on the middle of my foot actually curves inward a bit, and the outwards of my feet are closer to the ground, meaning that my footprint wouldn't be perfectly flat. It would actually have more of a more surface area, more of a ridge in the middle, because I don't have a perfectly flat foot. And that's what this looks like to me too. So it just looks too real. I mean, I'm not an archaeologist, so I don't know, folks. You let me know in the comments below.
I have a
Michael,
question,
yeah.
Chris. Can you give us that picture on the top there where we can see it zoomed out a bit? Yes. Okay. So right above the top toe, the big toe, it looks like that's, I mean, if this is an artwork, they really captured what it looks like to step in mud. Um,
Exactly. Yes. Thank
I mean,
you.
look at the top. That's what it looks like. The mud has been, when you step down, you're compressing it and you're also shifting it. So yes, right above that top toe, there's clumps of mud, as if that's where, your toe lifts up and it leaves that impression. You go step in mud, this is what it looks like. So if this is an artist rendition, this is like a Michelangelo rendition of a giant footprint. They really captured it.
And once again, if you're going to go, where is anything else around this depicting that this is a work of art? Where is there? I'm telling you, in this area, it is so remote. It's they had to recently just make roads to go in there for this industrial work that they're doing, and it just it's like the same argument with the Egyptian pyramids, where they still think that that's where the mummies are buried, even though they've never found a mummy ever, and there's no hieroglyphs or artwork inside these certain pyramids to show like if a king or a pharaoh died, there would be artwork everywhere, and we see that in the Valley of the Kings. There's so much artwork, and they're all about like, look at this piece. This is what this king was all about. There's nothing around that on this footprint. There's just it's a freaking rock in the middle of nowhere.
So the people, there must have been a town or something close. Was there any word from the locals about this?
On this one there wasn't, and it's a really good. So we're gonna do some other videos in the future on the other things I discovered. I didn't discover. I was shown by Michael Tellinger in South Africa, the Stone Circle ruins, which are actually the Stone Circles ruins all throughout the country of South Africa and a couple of other countries in the Southern Africa continent, where there's literally millions of different stones in different shapes of cymatic patterns, and they all ring like bells. And they're these resonant stones. It's very, very curious, very weird. Lots of information from locals on those things. This footprint, we didn't hear anything. It really was a question mark for everyone. So that's why I wanted to present that today and show everybody, like, look, I mean, we really don't know much about this. However, like you said, especially that mud at the top, where it just you do not need to be an archaeologist to look at this and say, well, wow, it literally looks like this was at one point mud or very soft, and a big giant footprint stepped in it, pushed the mud up as you're seeing here, and voila, however many thousands of years later, millions of years later, we've got this footprint.
I mean, this is compelling. This is so compelling. It looks like you could literally sit inside this thing and it could fit a full person.
Yeah, and it does. Like I sat inside. I don't have the photo here; it's on a different hard drive. But I sat inside that. We all took photos with it. It's like it's a whole thing to do, right? Why wouldn't you? And it's huge, folks. It's huge. So the size of the giant with a foot that's at least 4 feet tall. How big of a giant is that? It's huge. It's getting back to the size of the one that we saw at the beginning of this episode in the museum. I think
it's even bigger.
And it's probably bigger.
20 feet. I mean, I'm 5'8". My foot is it's probably close to, 12 inches long. So if you think about that, those ratios. Now, I look at this and I think, what stories, because I'm always compelled with the stories, right? The stories of yore, the stories of the ancients. And they do talk about titans.
Yes, the titans.
The
huge beings.
The Norse, they talk about these massive creatures who walked along. The First Nations here in Ontario and Canada, they talk about, how giants literally scooped out the earth, which formed lakes. Something this big could be capable of terraforming Earth on a scale that we can't even comprehend.
Because that's one of the interesting arguments when it comes to a lot of the advanced construction. Just wrapping it up for you folks today, because we're running out of time. One of the things that could be possible as well with all the ancient, highly advanced construction that we see all throughout the world. Yes, it could be, and it probably is, high technology with a lot of it. But some of it could literally be, how do they lift the blocks? If they were giant, like 20, 25 feet, 30 tall, it's probably a lot. Well, it would be a lot easier for them to lift these things. So it could have been built by giants, or it could have been built by a combination of highly advanced human technology and giants. Who knows? But the really interesting and the more important question we got to keep asking ourselves is, like, why is there so much around this world? Like, there's so many things. I want to know more about this museum, for example, in Ecuador. But we're like we said at the beginning of the episode, we're just scratching the surface on so much of this stuff. There are so many other things. While we were talking, I just quickly searched, for these giant sword artifacts, and there's tons. So people, like, go look this stuff up. Like, there's so many artifacts that you can find that are just huge. And
Well,
once again, why?
When it's pan cultural, when it's Africa, Europe, Asia, South America, North America. There's probably some I don't know off the top of my head, but if I was a betting man, I would say it's probably, yeah. I know New Zealand has stories of giants.
Well,
So
just
that
wait for Antarctica, as we did an episode on
right.
that, but we didn't even get into the archaeology of Antarctica and all the stuff that's likely, not confirmed, but likely being discovered, that as the ice melts with climate change. It's pretty exciting stuff. Who knows what we'll find there?
There's so much evidence that to suggest that all of that evidence is all nothing to see here. To me, that's like when people say, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory," that term gets thrown out so much.
Oh
And
yeah,
I look at it, I'm like, okay, so there's evidence on every continent, every culture, and now we have archaeological evidence to suggest it. To suggest that that's all nothing seems like there are conspirators trying to cover it up. Like,
that
which
seems
is
the less logical and smart, intelligent thing. It's to suggest that it's not real. I'm like, well, we don't know what it is, but it's definitely a phenomenon,
right.
and it needs to get more serious. The thing is, and I've heard this from many different academics, where you bring up things in these settings in a lecture hall, and I've experienced this firsthand. You bring up words like Atlantis, giants, the Nephilim, or anything that comes out of mythology, and legend, or just God forbid, again, it's conspiracy theories, and you're laughed out of the room. The problem is they won't even consider it. It's not like they've done a whole series of research and then been able to prove that this isn't actually real. It's no, they don't even bother with it. There's no attempt at research,
Right.
and
Well,
that's
I'll
the
look up
issue.
the History Britannica, and they talk about the first people of England, and they had to rid the land of giants.
Yeah,
The
and
Bible
dragons
talks
apparently
about it.
too. Yeah.
Oh,
Ooh, that's another
another
episode,
day,
folks.
another day. Well, look, Chris, I've had such a great time talking about this, and there's so much to unpack. And with our viewers, thank you so much. We look forward to your responses. Um, Guys, for 33 cents a day, you can help sponsor our content creator, Chris Noble, here to keep doing what he does, to keep exploring this and bring us wonderful content. So if you want to be an Ancient Mysteries Unearthed community member, I strongly encourage you to sign up. We've had a lovely time hanging out with you guys again. Thank you so much for watching. Share with your friends, like, subscribe. Chris, any final thoughts to our viewers?
Stay curious, everybody. Please let us know if you found anything on this episode that you want to share, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed.
Okay.
Thanks,
Stay
Brandon.
kind. Ciao for now, everyone.
See you, buddy.
Bye-bye.
Take care.